Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the books that I read in July. July was a bit of a meh reading month for me. I had like a lot of 3 and 3.5 star books, but I definitely had some winners in here as well. I actually continued my vibe of reading a lot of nonfiction, and I read 4 nonfictions during this month, which was like my largest genre, which was pretty cool. I read 11 books overall, and I will have these split up into genres so you can skip around if you want to. Starting off with sci-fi and fantasy, I read 1 fantasy and 1 sci-fi, so including them both in here. And I finished both of them on the last day of the month. So these are also both of my most recent reads as well. So the fantasy that I read is Wormwood Abbey. This is kind of more of a cozy fantasy, sort of in the vein of like Lady Trent and Emily Wilde. At least it feels a lot like that to me. It's about a young lady named Edith who is the daughter of a vicar. And she is also a mystery writer, but she keeps that kind of on the down low. So that way her dad doesn't have any like hits to his reputation as a minister or anything for people who don't approve of novel writing for young ladies. Her father inherits an estate, and her cousins are currently living on the estate. And so he's trying to figure out what he can do to benefit them and make sure that they're taken care of. It's kind of a similar situation to like the beginning of Sense and Sensibility, but with a lot nicer of a person that's in charge of the estate. Shortly into the book, Edith ends up finding this creature that she kind of like attaches to and loves, and there's some really mysterious things happening at Wormwood Abbey, and she's trying to get to the bottom of it. I thought this was really fun. I enjoyed it so much, and this is actually a Christian fantasy, and my first, I think, Christian fantasy I've read in a very, very long time, and the first Christian fiction I've read in a very, very long time that I actually really enjoyed and thought was really fun. I didn't think it was anything like revolutionary, but I did enjoy it. I felt like the Christian elements felt like they really belonged there, because this is definitely set in kind of a Victorian feeling setting. There's lots of literary references to Victorian writers, which is really fun. And the Christian and spiritual elements didn't feel out of place because her father is a vicar. It kind of reminds me of some of the conversations and settings in like Agnes Grey, for example, where, you know, there's a vicar that she gets close to, and then her father is also a vicar. So some of the conversations just feel organic and more a part of their everyday life. So it didn't feel as forced as some like more contemporary Christian fiction that I've read. And so I feel like I'm on the right track here with Christian fiction. I'm like, maybe I just need to be reading Christian fantasy, because up to this point, I've mostly read like Christian contemporaries and Christian historical fiction. And both contemporary and historical fiction are like some of my least read and least favorite genres. And so it makes sense that maybe I wouldn't enjoy those quite as much. So this was just like a fun little romp. It's a short little book, only like 200 pages or something like that. And it was enjoyable. I will probably continue on in the series. The other book that I completed, the science fiction, was dun dun dun, Dune. I had to add the dramatic music because this book is big and it's been on my shelf for a really, really long time. I did just do a spoilery vlog for my patrons that just came out yesterday. So I'm not going to go on and on and on about this book. This is a sci-fi classic, some people's like favorite book of all time. Like, it's very lauded as a masterpiece. And I don't even know fully how I would describe the plot of this book. It's essentially about this young man named Paul, and his father's a duke, and he and his father and mother move to a new planet that is like a desert that his father is going to be in charge of. And they have like this spice that they produce, and well, not produce, they process and sell, and it's essentially a drug. So whoever's in charge of this planet is sitting pretty financially. So there's a lot of political intrigue that's happening here. And yeah, so I'm not going to get into it much more than that. I honestly found a lot of this book to be very confusing, because there's a lot of political stuff, like I said, which I actually love politics in a fantasy or a sci-fi, but there's a lot of things that were just completely going over my head. And I ended up Googling some things about 80% of the way through, which I think helped me enjoy the ending of this book. The last 150 pages of this book, I had a lot of fun with and was eating it up and really enjoying like the culmination of the political intrigue and all the little moving pieces that were going along. But there was a lot of intricacies that where things would be like explained and you would have a lot of details about things, but then you would also have things that were completely vague and went totally over my head, and I never would have figured out on my own if I hadn't Googled it. The world building was really probably my favorite part of this. I really liked the setting of Arrakis, of this like desert place where there's like no water, and the people there have almost like created essentially like this kind of like religion surrounding water because moisture is so scarce, and seeing what they do to survive in these conditions and their dream of a world that's better. And like there are things about it that were so interesting. I really enjoyed certain aspects of this book, but I felt really really lost and confused for a lot of it, where I'm like, what are we saying? What are we doing? What's going on here? And there is so much like drug-induced visions and things that I like. It's hard sometimes to know like what's really real and what isn't. So it was an interesting experience, that's for sure. The next section is going to be classics. So for my Patreon, our book that we did for this month was Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. This is my first Jules Verne, and it is exactly what the title sounds like. There's this scientist who finds this discovery of like an ancient person who had figured out a way to the center of the earth. And so he's determined that he's going to go there, and he drags his nephew along for the ride. I really enjoyed the dynamic between the professor and his nephew. The nephew gets kind of snarky at times, and it's just funny. His uncle is very much like a like crotchety professor with a lack of self-awareness at times, which makes him kind of fun to read. There were moments where this book, the scientific elements were a little bit too complicated for me, where I was like, my eyes glazed over a little bit at parts of it. But overall, I thought that this book was really fun. A lot of the writing I really enjoyed, which makes me want to read more Jules Verne in the future. I also reread Northanger Abbey this month, and this ended up being kind of a spur of the moment buddy read with Rainey, where we both realized we were reading Northanger Abbey, so we talked about it together. Northanger Abbey is actually one of my favorite Jane Austens. I often say it's my very favorite, but there are 3 Jane Austens where whichever one I've read the most recently, I'm like, maybe that's my favorite. And the other 2 are Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion, in case you're wondering. Those 3 are always in my top, and then the bottom 3 never change in their order pretty much. So anyways, it was such a delight to reread this book. It's so fun. It was actually Jane Austen's first completed novel, but I think it was actually published posthumously or right before she died or something like that. It was one of her later published books, even though it was one of her first written. This book is very much a satire of Gothic thriller / romances a la Anne Radcliffe and the Mysteries of Udolpho, which is actually mentioned by name in this book. And so there's a lot of fun stuff surrounding that, and I really love our main character, Catherine, who's very naive and kind of goes out into society for the first time with a head full of Gothic novels, which causes her to sometimes see people as they are not, and then people who she probably should see what they are, she also doesn't see that sometimes. And so, I think that can make some people not like Catherine, but I feel like we've also all been there, being young and naive, me in particular. I also read Anne of Windy Poplars by Ellen Montgomery this month. I read it with Stephanie, and we're reading our way through the Anne books. This is book 4. 4. And we're now at the point, including this book, where I didn't really remember anything about this book except that it was epistolary, and I didn't really enjoy it that much because I'm not a huge fan of epistolary novels, as you probably know. So I was kind of going into this going like, okay, I remember reading this as a teen and not really enjoying it that much. And it was funny because I was talking to my daughter about it. My daughter's like, the whole book isn't in letters. The first few chapters are, and then you kind of alternate between letters from Anne to Gilbert and then back to like actually like just, recounting of what's happening. That was nice to know going in. But I actually really enjoyed this. And I think part of the reason I struggle with epistolary novels is I feel like I don't get as connected to the characters. However, Anne's writing all the letters that are found in this book, and I'm already quite attached to Anne because this is book 4. So I think that that really makes a difference for me. I did feel like in general, the story felt much more episodic than a lot of the other Anne books so far. And it even talks about, because Anne is like a principal of a school, and this book takes place over, I think, 3 or 4 years. And she goes back to Avonlea for like summers and winter breaks, but we almost never see that. And if we do, it's very, very briefly, and we don't really hear anything about what's going on with Diana or Marilla or Davy or Dora. And so it feels so disconnected from Avonlea that definitely like made me not love this quite as much. It's still like a solid 4-star for me, but the other ones have been like slam dunk 5 stars so far. Let's move into some nonfiction. So the first book that I actually completed this month, I think, was an audiobook that I started on my way home from my trip to New England in June, and then I finished it like a couple days or a day or so after we got back. And that's The Wager by David Grann. This is a story about these men on a ship that are seeking some treasure, and some things happen where some of the crew end up in this South American country telling a story of shipwreck and all these things and saying they're the only ones of their crew who survived. And then a few months later, several more men from that same crew end up shipwrecking in a different part of South America, telling a different story about mutiny and all these other things that happened. And so you're kind of presented with both sides of the story here. It sounds really, really interesting. And I do like the author's writing style. And I've read one of his other books, Killers of the Flower Moon. And for some reason, both of these books, I've had a similar reaction where I say like, oh, I like how descriptive his writing style is for a nonfiction, especially considering the fact that he's a journalist. I feel like he includes some nice descriptions of like kind of setting the scene, so to speak. But in both of the books, I feel like a story that I find really interesting when I hear what the story is about, I'm not very invested when I've actually read his books. And so I have this disconnect between his writing and the idea of this story and then like how it actually lands with me. So I found this book like okay, but I just ended up not being very interested in a lot of it. I had one 5-star read this month, well, other than Northanger Abbey, but that was a reread. So only one brand new 5-star this month. And that was Age of Opportunity by Paul David Tripp. This is a book that I meant to read in June and didn't, so I read it in July. This is a book about parenting teens biblically, and my gosh, what a breath of fresh air this book was. I enjoyed it so much. There's a lot of practicality in here, but there's also so much encouragement because, as I've talked about when I talked about this being on my TBR, there are so many people that include a lot of fear mongering around the teen years and are just like, oh, just wait till she's a teenager, just wait till this, and she's going to be rebellious, she's going to be terrible. And Paul David Tripp is like, why do we believe the gospel works for everyone except teenagers? We act like there's no way God could get through to them. Like, they're just going to rebel. They're just going to be terrible for a while. They're just going to, and he doesn't discount the fact that the teenage years are difficult for the teen and the parent because they're new challenges and we're trying to prepare them for independence and living outside the home. So he's not discounting that, but he is saying that the level of pessimism that we have is completely unbiblical, that's not how we should go into it approaching it. And he also talks about how oftentimes parents want to control the behavior of their teenagers without discipling their hearts at all. And so they try to control, strong arm, fear monger them into behaving a certain way so they won't, get pregnant in high school or do drugs and drink or, whatever, any of those things. And he's like, the bar is so low. When we look at it that way, we're not actually preparing them to live lives following the Lord. We're not preparing them to be functional adults in society. We're just trying to get through this and hope that they don't mess up too bad. And that is not how we should be approaching this at all. And so it was so encouraging, so wonderful, and I just loved it. So if you have a teenager or about to go into the teen years, as I'm about to in like less than 2 weeks, I highly recommend this. I thought it was so good. The last two nonfictions I have are both books that I read for K-Tropathon. So I read the group read, which was Escape from Camp 14 by Blaine Harden. This is a story of a man named Shin who was born into labor camps in North Korea. I will link our group discussion, and then also Christy had an interview with the author of this book that was really helpful to kind of contextualize, some of the things if you're new to this information, that North Korea has these huge labor camps that are just as cruel and awful, if not more so, than like concentration camps and the gulag. It's very heartbreaking at times because he was born into this camp, and his parents were essentially bred by the guards to produce him. And so he'd never known normal life at all. And it's very much everyone out for themselves, trying to survive, trying to snitch on everyone else in hopes that then maybe they can get more food. He'd never known any love or any kindness, only like severity and torture and pain. And a lot of the things that he talks about are really, really difficult to read, to be honest. But I felt like this was such a valuable book, and I'm really glad that I read it. I was riveted the entire time that I was reading it, and just am so glad that this was our group read. I think it fostered a lot of discussion. There was so much that I had learned, even having done some research into North Korea. There was a lot of things that I learned for the first time through this book. I will give one caveat that I knew going in, and it didn't bother me, and that's the fact that some of Shin's story has changed since this book was written. And a lot of that can be attributed to the trauma that he experienced and the lack of trust he has surrounding outsiders and authority figures because of what he went through in North Korea. And so there are things in this that have since been changed by him, but what he went through is still the same, even if some of the reasons or like setting surrounding it is maybe not exactly what he initially said in this book. He still did experience the level of torture and horror that is in this book. So if you get a newer edition, there is a foreword where Blaine Harden talks about those things and addresses exactly what has changed. I have an older edition, so it didn't do that, but because I knew that, I could research that going in. So that didn't make me dislike this book or discount the validity of this story. I also read The Sister by Sung Yoon Lee, and this is a book about Kim Jong-un's sister, who I didn't even know anything about, and I was surprised I hadn't really heard very much about her until I realized that she hasn't really been on the public scene for very long. There was a really long time where she was hidden away from the world, and it's only been in more recent years that she's risen to prominence and recognition in the public eye, but there's still so much we don't know about her. There's speculation on whether or not she's married or has children, but there's no actual proof whether or not she is or has children or any of those kinds of things. So one thing I really appreciate about this author is that he didn't speculate. He said like, hey, people speculate about this stuff, but we don't know. We have no idea for sure some of the things that people say about her. And so I appreciated that he really kept this to the facts and not to his opinions or like his investigation and what maybe he thought. It was more like, this is what happened. A lot of this book is about her background, about her parents, her brother, her grandfather. A lot of it has to do with that. And I think that's disappointing for some people because they want this to be entirely about her life. But again, because there are so many things we don't know about her, that would be unfair. But all of her background greatly shaped who she is as a person, and the way that she behaves and the power that she holds, all of that is very much shaped by her background. I thought this book was really interesting. However, I did find the writing to be pretty dry. It was much easier going when I was listening to it on audiobook because I find that I'm not as critical of writing style when I'm listening to a book as I am when my eyes are on the page. So I enjoyed it more on audio, but I still felt like it was pretty dry and also kind of repetitive at times, but I still thought it was interesting and worth the read if this is something that you're interested in. It was just published in 2023, so a lot of the information in this is still very current, so that's helpful as well. Lastly, let's dive into translated fiction, which I have two of, one of which I also read for K-Tropathon, and that's The Second Chance Convenience Store, which this is a book that was published in Korea a few years ago, has garnered a lot of buzz and popularity in South Korea, and was just translated into English this year. This is a story about an older lady who owns a convenience store, and she's forgotten her purse and she left it at a train station in Seoul. And so she receives a phone call from someone saying, "Hey, I found your purse. I'm here at this train station. Come back and I'll have it for you." When she comes back, she realizes that the man who has, held onto her purse and protected it is a homeless man who is drunk. And so she takes him back to her convenience store and feeds him and is kind to him in thanks for him, holding on to her purse and all that kind of stuff. And by the end of the first chapter, she's actually decided to hire him to work overnights at her convenience store. This man has like an alcohol-induced dementia, and so he doesn't remember how he ended up on the streets or remember a lot of his past, but some of that starts coming back as he starts interacting with his coworkers, with employees, and you just watch his like gentleness of spirit and how he ends up changing and ends up changing the people around him. And I just thought it was really heartwarming and sweet. It reminded me a lot of our group read for K-Tropathon last year, which is Welcome to Hyundam Bookshop. So it had a very similar feel to me in terms of the importance of community and how being together and being kind to others not only enriches your own life, but also the lives of people around you. So I really enjoyed it a lot, but I do think I probably still like Hyundam Bookshop a little bit more because of the bookish element and also because they opened a coffee shop in there. So there's a really great coffee emphasis there as well. But I really, really liked Second Chance Convenience Store a lot. The other translated book that I read is translated from Japanese, and that's The Housekeeper and the Professor, which I read for my in-person book club. And actually I did for Wormwood Abbey as well. The Housekeeper and Professor was supposed to be our book for the month of June, but we didn't meet until I think 8 days into July or something. So I ended up reading it in July, and then Wormwood Abbey was the book for July. So I technically read 2 book club books in 1 month. Anyways, this is a story about a woman who is a housekeeper who ends up keeping house for a professor who actually has short-term memory loss, and so he can only remember the last, I think, 80 minutes or so. He's a professor of mathematics, and his love of math is so contagious that it kind of bubbles over onto the housekeeper and her young son, and you just watch the relationship between the three of them grow as the book progresses. I loved the character development and the relationships in this book, but I found that it was entirely too much math for me. So much of the math is actually delved into on the page, and so it's not like talking about math in the abstract. You see actual problems on the page. And then baseball is also a huge part of the book, and that really makes sense with a professor of mathematics loving baseball with all the statistics and that kind of stuff. That makes complete sense to me. However, I don't like math, and I really, really don't like baseball. So there was a lot of delving into technicalities of things that I really don't enjoy and have no interest in whatsoever. And so as a result, I would kind of check out during huge sections of the book that I was just like, are we done yet? Can we get back to the other stuff? Because I don't care about you going to the library and spending an entire chapter in the math section trying to find the answer to a problem that no one's been able to figure out yet. Like, I don't care. So I think that really dragged the book down for me. If it had been talked about more in the abstract, I think I would have enjoyed it more because I loved the relationships and the character work. So those are the books that I read in August. I'm going to take a second to update my bingo board for you for Summer Book Bingo. If you haven't heard of Summer Book Bingo, I will link my announcement video because it's not too late for you to jump in, as it takes place over the whole summer. And it's just a simple little bingo board that has a giveaway associated with it. You can plug in any book that you've read this summer so far. You might even already have a bingo and not know it. Anyways, I used a lot of the books that I read this month for bingo spaces, but not all of them. So I'll put my bingo board up here on the screen. I used Wormwood Abbey for sci-fi fantasy space. I used Dune for over 500 pages. I used Northanger Abbey for rereading a favorite. Anna Wendy Poplars for yellow on the cover. There's not a lot of yellow on my cover, but there's enough that I'm counting it because the book I was going to use for that ended up being a DNF. The Wager was a library audiobook. Escape from Camp 14 I used for the survivalness or wilderness space. Age of Opportunity I put in the nonfiction space. The Housekeeper and the Professor was flowers on the cover, and the Second Chance convenience store is a place you'd like to visit. So as you can see, I now have a lot of bingos. I was like, wow, it was taking me forever to get bingos, and now I have a ton of them, and I think I only have 4 spaces left. I don't have my actual board in front of me. I just have like written down what I used the books for. But I think I only have like 4 spaces left. And one of those spaces is the shortest book on my TBR, and another space is a short story or novella. And so I feel like I'm for sure going to black out my board this year. I don't black it out every single year. And you don't have to black it out to be part of Summer Book Bingo. You only need 1 bingo to be entered into the giveaway. So you definitely don't have to black out your board, but it is a fun challenge if you want to do that. Anyways, that's my update for that as well. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you've been reading lately. What was your favorite book that you read in the month of August? Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.